Welcome to another episode of Healthcare Connections podcast, powered by Healthcare Compliance Pros. I am your host, Jeremy Winn. Our purpose for this podcast is to introduce you to key topics and experts in the healthcare industry to ensure you have what you need to successfully manage your practice. Please subscribe and follow us on our social media channels to make sure you don't miss any new episodes. If you have recommendations for guests or topics for this podcast, email me at jwin@hcp.md. With that, enjoy this episode of the Healthcare Connections podcast. Hello, welcome to this episode of the Healthcare Connections podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Winn, the Director of Sales and Marketing at Healthcare Compliance Pros. Excited for today's conversation. I've got Maria Melone from Caber Hill Advisors with me. Hello, Maria. Good to have you here.
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I was on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago and saw a really cool survey that you put out. So I wanted to bring you on and talk about it. But before we jump into that, I'd love for you to give a more appropriate introduction to our listeners of what you do with Caber Hill, kind of your role, your history in healthcare. I know you've got a lot of vast experience.
Yes, happy to do that. So I'll just dive into myself first and then
Right.
jump into what we're doing at Caber Hill. So I started my career as a CPA with KPMG and, was introduced to the dental industry through that. Ultimately, ended up getting hired by a client of mine in their corporate development department. So I spent 10 years with them on the buy side of dental acquisitions. Had about 100 transactions with them. Pretty big range in size from, a chart record acquisition of about $50,000 to a multi-location, multidisciplinary group that was over 90 million. Yeah. And then in 2020, I decided to leave that company, started my own, really recognized that there was a need in the marketplace for a bit of a more sophisticated representation for sellers. And so I moved to the sell side of transactions, still focused on in dental, started my own firm. And then in basically at the end of 2020 decided to join Craig Castelli and his firm Caber Hill Advisors, where we continue to have a very strong focus on healthcare broadly, still have a pretty strong presence in the dental space. But we also do things like facility services, roofing, paving, and we also have someone that's more of a generalist. I mean, he's done anything from healthcare staffing to flooring companies to some lubrication of some machinery manufacturers. So
Yeah.
pretty wide range of businesses. And, I usually bring that up because, I think it's interesting that we do, while we are healthcare focused, we do have this broader perspective on the market, the larger
Right.
marketplace, which I think just gives us a little bit of an edge in being able to see how different deals are structured in different industries, and oftentimes can help bring creative solutions to us in certain situations.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that
Yeah.
that introduction. I appreciate that. And again, as I mentioned, lots of experience and doing some pretty mega deals. It sounds like in your career, and 90 million is no joke on that deal. So very
Yeah.
cool.
Yes.
So I mentioned this survey, which is what caught my attention and really why I wanted to reach out to you, Maria. So you released a middle market M&A survey of your private equity partners, and this was looking back at 2024 and then ahead to 2025. I found it pretty interesting. I was hoping you could take a few minutes, provide an overview of some of the key insights that you learned from the survey.
Sure. Happy to. I think what was interesting was as far as 2024 went, many felt it really ended better than expected.
Yeah.
2024 was certainly a slow year, and this may sound a little self-serving, as an investment banker, but to say, that we do expect a more robust market in 2025, and um, we felt it would be interesting and important for sellers to hear directly from those that are investing, and to give them some confidence, um, that there would be continued interest, and hopefully an uptick in interest in the space. We certainly expect the volume of transactions
Hmm.
to increase, as well as overall valuation. Um, this didn't necessarily come out of the survey, but I think another thing to keep in mind is it's estimated that about 40% of privately held businesses today are owned by baby boomers,
Yeah,
many of whom, will rely on the sale of their business as a significant component of their retirement strategy. And so, that really suggests, just generally, from a broader perspective, that there will be a significant increase in companies of all,
all
um,
industries, right?
type.
They're going to be
Yeah,
coming
exactly.
available for purchase, and
Coming to
yeah,
market. Yeah, in the next, that's probably a little bit bigger of a window, the next 5 to 15 years, but
yeah.
something else to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And as I looked at the survey, you kind of hinted at it, but looking at a general consensus, they think the market in 2025 is going to be stronger. That deal volume is going to increase. I mean, I think I think about 70% of respondents, I don't have the exact number, said that it definitely should be better as far as volume goes in the healthcare space in 2025. And you mentioned the valuation. That was interesting to me, that valuations may also increase a little bit, which they've certainly, was it what, 21, 22 was the peak? What was the peak year for valuations? And then everybody wanted those same multiples, and with interest rates and stuff and many other factors, those went down. But they are anticipating potentially a little uptick in valuations as well.
Yeah, I think several factors, maybe at a macroeconomic level, I think are helping there. I think the other thing that you're probably going to see is that a lot of the really quality assets,
Yeah,
stayed on the sidelines because of what was going on. And so, naturally, you would expect those to command higher valuations.
absolutely. Okay. And then anybody, I'm just make sure I get this right. If you want to access this survey that Caberhill, Maria, and team put together, caberhill.com, CABER hill.com. You can find it on their website under the resources. There's a selection for market surveys. It's right there on the website. Again, really great information, really interesting things that came out from that. So thank you for that. So looking ahead to 2025, um, healthcare is so big, so many specialties. Are there certain specialties that you're focused on, or that you anticipate they're going to have more interest and more volume than others?
I think in dental, I think we're still going to see a pretty strong market. I think what will be interesting is there were a number of larger, private equity backed DSOs that stayed on the sidelines, and
Hmm.
certainly those investors have had a longer hold period.
Yeah,
So I think it'll be interesting to see if they feel like now is the right time. Um, I, also think that med spa is certainly heating up. It's really considered to be, very attractive as an investment, you know, um, and maybe somewhat similar to dental, say, 10 or more years ago.
hmm,
Um, there's just a lot of growth in the industry, generally speaking. um, it's considered a low risk from a reimbursement
yeah,
perspective.
yep,
There's a lot of recurring revenue that's associated with med spas, and so all those things add up to being very attractive.
yeah. I think from the reimbursement side, obviously, we're seeing we're getting lots of questions. When it comes to coding and billing, and in healthcare, is
as the new administration comes in and they're looking at fraud, waste, abuse from the government in general, right? Everywhere, what happens when they get into Medicaid, Medicare. I think there's a lot of people nervous about that right now. And so that's why, again, the med spa, we're seeing the same thing in, as far as volume of deals that we're doing from a compliance perspective, as we're implementing compliance programs in the medical practices. Med spa is one of our fastest growing areas. And I think a lot of it is driven by, there's a lot of interest in consolidation in the med spa space. And some of these groups are coming to us and saying, hey, I've really never done a lot of compliance. I know I need to do something. I think I'm going to have more oversight as this industry evolves. Can you help shore up my compliance? And so we're seeing it on our side too, just from the number of owners in med spas that are trying to even, more professionalize, I guess, their practice and get it ready for an acquisition.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. There is a lot of fragmentation with a number of these specialties. Some other areas that I think are really interesting are, women's health in particular is really
Mm-hmm.
starting to heat up. We're seeing a little bit of an uptick in surgical centers, as well as behavioral health. So, all really interesting spaces.
Absolutely. So as if there's an owner listening, right, or and they're looking thinking, you mentioned, over the next 5 to 15 years, a lot of these privately owned businesses in every sector um, looking for a potential transaction, and it's just as part of a retirement plan. So for an owner out there who's trying to prepare themselves for a transaction, whether it's a retirement move or it's just, hey, I'm ready to to take the next step in my business and I want to become part of a larger organization. What are, as an advisor, what are some of the areas you're focusing on and where you're finding that a lot of groups need to, for lack of a better word, button up a little bit to prepare themselves for a potential transaction?
I think the first step is just the plan itself. I mean, oftentimes we're contacted by a business owner and they're ready to sell,
Yeah.
and they want to sell. And, and that's fine. We certainly can help them and assist them, but it really limits our ability to ensure that we can truly maximize, not only the value of the business, but also the structure, the deal terms associated
Right.
with it. And so, having a conversation with, an advisor such as Caber Hill, anywhere from, 3 to 5 years out is something we really encourage, from the planning perspective, but also I think it allows you to establish a relationship, and going through a transaction, the sale of a business that you've built for anywhere from 5 to 10 to over 25 years is um, not only stressful and time consuming, but can be pretty emotional. And so, if you've got a strong relationship with advisor, I think certainly that can help that process. um, the other piece of it that I think many owners neglect is, again, back to planning, but focused on, their personal financial, picture,
Mm-hmm.
both, historically now and, what's going to be their future.
Right.
In many cases, we're talking about, significant, dollars that are going to be in their hands, and having a plan, with a wealth manager, not only for the transaction itself to make sure that we're going to maximize or minimize taxation, but maximize net earnings. But also, the plan for the future of how you're going to invest and use and spend that money is, I think, really important. And again, um, there's a lot of, especially today, very interesting structures that can be implemented to really minimize tax, but they often need time, just to document and put in place,
Yeah.
to get the best outcome. Um, and I also will say, I think certainly compliance. I mean, compliance is very difficult. It's hard. It's it's laborious. It's the last thing people want to do, right? And so it often
Very
gets
true.
neglected and put in a drawer, and um, and that can have you don't always realize that, but should an issue come up during due diligence after you've accepted an offer and are trying to get to closing, it could potentially have a pretty significant impact on the transaction, whether it's a purchase price adjustment, or even potentially causing a buyer to not be interested in getting to close anymore. So
Yep.
certainly encourage people to think about that. And then just overall sort of having things in order, like knowing where all your contractual documents are. You know the boring part of being a business owner, but being organized in that way is certainly very helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And speaking of compliance, that's, we have a lot of partners in the private equity space that will come to us for help, right? Whether it's to put a compliance program into one of their portfolio companies because they're looking to recapitalize on that investment in the next couple of years. And they know, man, we really need to shore this up a little bit. But what they've always told us is, compliance may or may not add to a value of a practice. It just depends on the transaction. But what it certainly can do is if it's not in place, it can kill a deal. And that's always hard to have happen in the last, moments as you're trying to cross the finish line. So yeah, so that's a great point. Thank you. And then last thing, I think there's a lot of this happening. There's a lot of interest in healthcare, I think, in general, from investors and probably non-traditional investors in healthcare. I'm sure there's a lot of direct solicitations that go out to practices. Just maybe a word of warning that you could provide, because I'm sure every healthcare practice owner is seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably I know especially in the dental space, there's no shortage, whether it's strategics, whether it's private equity firms directly, whether it's buy side advisors that are hired by a strategic or a private equity firm. I mean, um, it's I think people are being inundated, and I think it's easy to potentially take the call, answer the email, um, send some financials, and, you're generally going to get back, a response that's attractive.
Right.
But you're typically only considering the economics in that situation, and there's so much that goes into getting a transaction closed, ensuring that you're getting maximized value, ensuring that you're getting the best deal terms and deal structure, um, and working with someone that does that day in day out is really to your benefit. um, we have had a number of situations where our clients have come to us with offers in hand. One in particular, he responded to, he actually responded to two different strategics, was able to have offers from both of them that were definitely very attractive. Um, but he reached out to us because his CPA said, you should maybe just talk to Maria about this before you sign on the dotted line. And he had a business that was growing pretty aggressively, and when you only just sell your or share your financials, that's a historical picture of your business. It doesn't capture any upward trends, even if the trend started in the historical period. It really doesn't tell the best story about what that business is going to do in the future and how it's going to perform for an investor. So we were able to help that client negotiate with the preferred buyer, and got over a 20% increase in the valuation, was able to negotiate more equity rollover and a preferred position, and more cash at close. So, again, overall, it wasn't just about, the money, although that's very important, but some of those deal terms, can be equally as important and can have some significant economic consequences down the line. The other thing I'll say about, responding to a solicitation is, you are only giving yourself typically an opportunity to receive an offer from one party. And, every buyer out there structures deals differently. Every buyer's culture is different. Every buyer's growth opportunities are different. So you're missing out on what your actual opportunity is by sort of only talking to one party, or even if you talk to, 3 parties, you're missing out on knowing what's truly out there, but you're also missing out on some competitive nature of the process that really contributes to ensuring, deals are, at the best valuations with the best deal terms and best structures.
Love that. That's really, really wise. Sometimes the biggest deal isn't the best deal, right? The structure matters. The fit of, the plan after matters. Like that's awesome. So Maria, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to contact you if they're interested in some of your advisory services?
Sure. Email or cell phone is fine. Both are available on our website, but it's pretty easy. Maria@caberhill.com. And my cell phone is 339-927-8882.
Awesome. Maria, thank you so much for coming on today. Such an important topic. Congratulations on the survey. Lots of great information for everybody. You're doing a great service for those of us that try to monitor the M&A space in healthcare. So thank you so much for being on today.
Oh, it was my pleasure, and good to see you, and hope to see you in person soon.
Yes, we will soon. Thanks, Maria. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Healthcare Connections podcast. For more information on the topic we covered today, you can reach out to me or to our guest. For any additional information on healthcare compliance pros, feel free to email me at jwin@hcp.md. Don't forget to tune in next week. Thank you.